Have you ever felt so burned out that you wanted to quit your job? Just total work burnout, total stress, feeling overwhelmed, and just exhausted, just purely exhausted from work. 63% of US employees are ready to quit their jobs because of stress, because of burnout. Of the list of careers that top the list are healthcare workers, and that's both human healthcare and veterinary medicine, teachers, social workers, first responders, super high stress positions, and positions that have tight deadlines. This would be corporate positions, corporate managers, journalists, media professionals are all at high risk for burnout. Today, we're going to talk about workplace burnout, the risks, the signs that you may actually be starting to burn out, and most importantly, some actionable steps that you can do to reduce your risk of stress, reduce your risk of burnout, control your stress. The Health Span Digest. In the next 20 to 30 minutes, I'm going to leave you with one action item you can start today to extend your health span. This weekly podcast is dedicated to translating the science of health and longevity into realistic and easy to follow steps. Our topics range from nutrition to exercise to sleep and healthy habits to navigating stress, injuries, and limited time. And here's the disclaimer. This is not medical advice. It's just my observations from a nearly 30-year career in the rehab and fitness industries. And with that, let's get rolling. This is very much an emotional well-being issue. It's one of the pillars of health span. It's a mental health issue. It's a happiness issue. And we all want to be happier. And of course, if you are burned out or at risk of burning out, that is a direct conflict with the sense of being happy and fulfilled. My name is Aaron Shaw, and I'm from HealthSpan Physio Coaching. I am an occupational therapist and strength coach by training with nearly 3 decades of experience. I have been working with clients to improve their health, well-being, physical capacity for a very, very long time. I currently do consults with people as well as have some long-term coaching clients, and I work in a clinic. I do rehab for people with orthopedic injuries, specifically the arm and hand injuries. And if you happen to be somebody that's looking for a consult with somebody like myself, I'll leave my contact information in the show notes. I do individual consults all the time, so feel free to reach out, ask me any questions that you have, or comment on this video on YouTube, or send me a message via the podcast platforms. I always respond to people who have questions about the episode that I create. And all of my podcasts, all of my messaging is about health span. Health span is the length of time within our lifespan that we are healthy, active, and vibrant. And specifically, I talk about the pillars of health span, which are exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional well-being, and preventative care. And definitely the idea of workplace burnout is an emotional well-being issue. It's a preventative care issue. We can really work on some things to prevent problems by managing our stress, managing our workplace stress that unfortunately far too many of us have to deal with. If you find that health span and these specific topics, these pillars mean something to you and you think are important, please subscribe to my podcast and give me a subscribe on YouTube as well. That would be totally awesome. But let's talk about how we can identify if we are in a state of near burnout from our work-related situations or work-related stress, or this sometimes I suppose a work-related stress or burnout that if you know you have it, you have it. You don't need to have a blood test to see if you have workplace burnout or if you're burned out. You know what that feeling is like. But we're going to dig into this a little bit and again leave you with a couple of very specific things you can do to help manage that. So first, what is burnout? What does that even mean? I know it sounds a little bit like a buzzword that means probably a lot of things, but workplace burnout, workplace stress, first of all, it's a $300 billion a year problem for US companies. So $300 billion a year of lost revenue from people who quit their careers, leave their jobs, calling in sick, basically calling in burned out, and not being able to produce the work of their position because they are absolutely burned out. It is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged stress. So think about that for a second. It is emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion by prolonged stress. So if it's not just having a bad day or a stressful day at the office or a day that's super busy or having one deadline or one project that you're on, that you kind of get through and then you're done. It's really a sense of, this kind of being beat down really over a longer period of time that unfortunately you can't recover from. And big part of my life is physical fitness and training. And in a sense, this would be overtraining. If you keep pushing your body and never give it a rest, or if you keep on try to push through too many sleepless nights, if you try to push through prolonged stress, all of these things accumulate over time and will crush us, basically crush us emotionally, and there will actually be very real physical symptoms with, in a lot of cases, of emotional burnout as well. So what are the symptoms of burnout? You probably are familiar with them if you're listening to this, or if you've been listening thus far. It is a feeling of fatigue. It is a feeling of really having like decreased performance, maybe even like this emotional, mental detachment from the work that you're doing, where you're kind of almost thinking more about how much you dislike it or how sick of it you are, as opposed to focusing on the actual tasks at hand. So you're almost being preoccupied. And it is definitely a feeling of hopelessness. I have had these feelings. I have had definitely periods of burnout, so much so to the point that I was very close to leaving my career probably a dozen years ago now. And actually, several times before and since, I suppose, I've had this sense that I've just had too much stress for too long, that I was having a hard time managing. And in a weird way, I kind of, this is even weird to say, but I do not do the best possible work with my clients, which means with every patient I see in the clinic, they leave and I know that I can actually help them more, even though they're walking out the door and I just told them to leave. They were done for the day, done for the session. There's always more that I can do for that client. There's more exercises I could do with them. There's more education I could provide for them. There's more manual therapy techniques I could do with them, more stretching, more tissue work that I do with some of the hands-on mobilization things that I do in the therapy clinic. I could provide better care. I could. And it sounds terrible to say that there's more I can offer people, yet I'm sending them away. And the reason that situation comes up, and it literally comes up every single day. Every single day I provide, in my mind, subpar care. I could do more for people, but I'm not. I'm kind of in a sense choosing not to. And the reason is because I'm constrained by the system. I'm constrained by the healthcare system, the insurance system, the healthcare model in the US, which is what I practice in. And it's tough. I mean, it's tough because I'm limited by, you know, insurance, health insurance cutting off care for clients. And again, it's not because I can't help them. It's not because they don't want my help. It's because insurance stops paying for it. Or clients cannot pay for it out of their own pocket. They can't afford to have the care that they need for their injury. There are short treatment times. We have back-to-back sessions, and if you've ever been into a doctor's office or a therapy clinic or a dentist office or whatever it is, it is, and again, without passing judgment on whether people want it this way or not, it's designed where it's patient after patient after patient after patient, and there's a time that appointments start and a time that appointment ends, and we send people out the door all the time when they could actually have more care than we're providing in that moment. And as a provider, it's stressful and it's sad and frustrating and disappointing to tell somebody that, I'm not going to treat you anymore, not because you don't need my help, and not that I can't help you. It's because this system that we're in says you're done. It is an external, again, system or ecosystem of the healthcare model. And practicing this way for nearly 30 years now, I've had periods where I thought, this is just ridiculous. I can't do it anymore. It's sad, frustrating, disappointing, all those things. And I would be out of this career by now if not for a couple of specific strategies that I've used and continue to use to resist burnout, resist throwing in the towel and saying, forget it, it's not worth it anymore. And that's what we're going to cover right now. So what are some of these strategies that we can practice to resist burnout, resist that crappy feeling of chronic stress, just absolutely despising what you do on a day-to-day basis for work, which is not what you don't want to be in that position, because we spend so much time working that if you literally despise what you do and are frustrated by what you do and are chronically stressed by what you do, you are going to be shortening your lifespan. You are going to be shortening your health span. I have other episodes that talk specifically about stress and the very real physiological problems that you have from chronic stress. It relates to everything from heart disease and diabetes and just the mental depression, the mental health component of it. So we need to have strategies that we can manage our work, manage our workplace, our careers, and not find ourselves chronically stressed, chronically crushed by what we're doing. So I'm going to talk about two specific ones, but acknowledge that there are many, many more. And of the ones that are, I want to say, easier to talk about, I'm picking the two, what I think are the hardest ones to talk about, because they are hard to create real action items from, because they really involve, or at least one of them really involves, a very emotional perspective of things, which is hard. It's much harder to describe and define and to have action items around emotional perspectives than it is to say perhaps physical strength. If you could do more push-ups and your stress would go away, well, then do more push-ups. That's pretty easy. But sometimes changing our perspective on things, our point of view on things, is much more challenging, even though push-ups are hard to do. So let's talk about a couple of things you can do to help fortify yourself to minimize your risk of burnout, or if you feel like you're in a burned out state right now, how you can recover from that. The first one is setting boundaries to prevent burnout. It is incredibly important for us to own almost like have a safety zone around us where we can feel like we're in control. And there's very clear evidence that when people feel out of control, that's when a lot of stress happens. And the more in control we are of our environment, and in the work setting, this means really having boundaries and at least some control of the work hours you have, the tasks that you have to do for work, and how your communication is with the people that you need to engage with. And if you can have some control over these specific items, you are less likely to have burnout. Of course, you don't always have control over your work hours. You don't always have control of the tasks that you have to do. You don't always have complete control over communications that you have with other people. We all have people, if we work in an office environment, or need to engage with other people regularly, we probably have people or clients or customers that we don't really like communicating with, or we have a hard time communicating with, or it's just an abrasive, uncomfortable conversations that we have with them. So some of these things we can't control, but the more control we have, the more boundaries we can set, will enable us to kind of create our own safe working space, a safe work environment that will decrease our risk of burnout. So how do you set boundaries? How do you set these boundaries to really create a safe workspace where you feel like you aren't going to be crushed by stress? One of the biggest tips is communicating your needs. And probably even a step before that is identifying. So I think that it's easy for us to identify what we don't like. I don't like this. I don't like my hours. I don't like so-and-so. I don't like the specific tasks I'm doing. I don't like the way things are done. It's much harder this is my challenge for you. You can kind of go through and make a list of things that you don't like. But for everything you don't like, clearly define what you would like. So if you don't like going to work, starting your workday at 7 a.m., exactly what time do you want to start your workday? If you don't like your break schedule, if you don't like only having 30 minutes for lunch, exactly how many minutes for lunch do you want? And go on and on down every single thing that you think is a stressor at work, or things that are uncomfortable, the volume of tasks that you have, the timeline of tasks that you have, the timeline of projects that you have, and go one by one and document. I hate that I only have 1 week to complete this project. Exactly how many weeks do you need? Write it down. Be precise, because I can tell you, as somebody who's owned my business and have had employees working for me, when somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I don't like this." Okay, then what do you want? Well, I don't know, but this sucks. Well, okay, well, this is the challenge of a little bit of being human beings. It's really easy to say when something sucks, but it's really hard to say, okay, how can I fix this for you? But if you can identify these things, and then the key here is communicate your ideal situation with your supervisors. with people who perhaps have control over your lunch schedule or your time you clock in or the time you leave, or when they expect you to, check your email and whatnot. Communicate these preferred boundaries with somebody who has control over them. And that will at least put it on the table. And now you have an opportunity to have a discussion and figure out, hey, can some of these things be changed? If it's a discussion that is productive and very much intended to be productive and cooperative, you can talk to supervisors and say, hey, I'm starting to feel a little bit burned out. I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, really preoccupied and kind of negative about, my overall work experience. And so I've come up with a couple of specific things that I think would help. Can these be, accommodated? Can these things change in my schedule and the demands that I have? And then it's on the table. And I think that you may not get everything that you want, but at least if it's on the table and it's a discussion, you'd probably be surprised what things can change, what accommodations can be made. And this is where negotiation comes in, but you may be able to do a little give and take and find yourself in a work environment where you actually have more control, less stress, less feelings of overwhelm, less pressure. And whatever stresses there are, maybe it matches kind of what you feel like your capacity is. So it's a win-win. Because I mean, the reality is work isn't supposed to be absolutely stress-free. If it was stress-free and easy, you probably wouldn't get paid for doing it. But is it within, do the demands match what your capacity is, what your abilities are, what you're able to do? And if so, you may just with that alone, you may have just eliminated all of your risk for burnout because you've had a few accommodations on schedule changes and tasks and whatnot that you're now able to achieve the things you want in an environment where you feel much more control. Another tip for setting boundaries in the workplace is use of this very powerful word, no. Saying no. And those of us that are in the caregiving world and people pleasers, it's very hard. It's a very hard word for us to say because we want to help people. We want to take care of people. And so it's saying no means you're going to disappoint somebody. And so that can be uncomfortable for us, having the sense that I'm going to disappoint somebody, and people are going to be disappointed in me because I said no, and I'm not going to help them in a certain situation. Every single time you say no to additional work or more demands, you are creating this sort of protective fortress around your emotional well-being, which will serve you very well in resisting burnout. So it is okay to say no when you're asked to do certain things. So now let's take the other point of view of this, where if you've communicated what you feel like are your ideal boundaries for work, your work time, your work schedule, your work demands, you're scheduling certain breaks, you're communicating when you would prefer to have breaks, and you're learning how to say no to certain things that you feel like are just overwhelming to you. You may find that those boundaries that are ideal for you are not ideal for the workplace. You may want to have a 2-hour lunch and come in at 10 o'clock in the morning and leave at 3 in the afternoon. That's going to feel really good for you and safe, and you may not be in a place that that's going to be compatible with, and that's okay. So in those situations where you have your ideal, ideally you would even write this down, like your ideal description of a comfortable and sustainable yet productive workplace boundaries around yourself. And if that is presented to the people who can help you, create that environment, and those people, your bosses, the management says, nope, can't do that, you have a decision to make. You can own it and say, okay, well, in that case, I cannot continue to do this job. I cannot continue in this career, perhaps. Maybe if this is the norm for anywhere I go, changing jobs doesn't always change the demands of what you have. But if it's not a good fit, then okay. I mean, that kind of sucks, obviously, if you put a lot of time and effort into it. Like, with my example, like the idea of leaving my rehab and fitness career after decades in it was a hard option, an option I frankly wasn't willing to take. I decided to do something else, um, but you will have the option of either leaving the position, leaving the career, or accepting a certain level of discomfort. And if work can't accommodate your ideal 60-minute lunch and you only get 30 minutes and you feel rushed through that, you could choose to say, well, it's not ideal, but I can make that work. Or you maybe want to have lighter workload, lighter task load. And when you present that to people who could potentially do that and they say, no, that's not going to work here, you can accept that. Say, you know what, that's not really comfortable, but it is what it is. I'm going to have to deal with it. And realize that maybe there's something else, some other little lever that you can choose to do to give you a sense of control. But realize that just because you want something and you feel like, even if you literally need this to succeed, your need of a certain boundary may not be able to be accommodated in a certain job, and that is unfortunate. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it creates an opportunity for something else to come your way. Maybe it puts some other things on the table that really gives you food for thought, or maybe you get some feedback from a supervisor or boss of manager of some sort, to really help you realize, like, oh, maybe this isn't for me, or hey, maybe there's an alternative path for me to go down that sounds much more fulfilling. But the key to this is defining what your boundaries are. That's the main point here, is defining what your boundaries are and making sure that they are clear, and not just what you don't want, but make them clear in what you do want. So if I'm the manager or I'm the boss, and somebody comes to me and says, hey, this part of my job really stinks, I would that doesn't really help me much. What would be helpful if somebody came to me and said, hey, I've come up with three things that, if my job, if my work life would include these three things, I would be much more happier. I feel like I'd have less stress. I feel like I'd be able to do more for the company, do more for the business if I had these three things. If I'm a manager, I would say, show me what those three things are. Because if you're going to show me three things that'll actually make you, more valuable for the business, and you're going to feel better, like, show me what they are. And so own own the piece of this boundary setting, which is being explicit about what those boundaries are, and share those with somebody who can help you with those boundaries. Of course, this does mean there may be necessarily some challenging conversations. So you'll have to practice your talk in front of the mirror, perhaps, or make sure you're organized well enough to have your talking points. It's perfectly fine to read off a bullet point list, or prepare a manager with an email ahead of time that says, hey, this is some things I'm going to talk about. Here are the three things. Here are the 3 points I want to make today or tomorrow, whenever we meet. Having all that angst inside of you, and I can, for myself too, like having all these things inside of me and not being able to express them, is part of the burnout. It's part of the symptoms of burnout. So that's what really kind of pulls us down. And that brings us to the second point that I want to make, and really the second and last main point I want to make about ways to alleviate the pressure of work with the workplace and the risk of burnout. And that is adjusting expectations. And there's a phrase that I've heard a lot. This is a little bit of stoicism. I'm sure I've heard it from a couple of kind of influencers and business people that I follow. And maybe this is like, the analogy is, Nike's, slogan, which is just do it. I think there's another slogan that's equally as simple, and that is, it just is. It just is. And that is adjusting the expectations for the reality of the situation, the reality of the career that you're in, the reality of the job you're in, the reality of what you have to do to make a living. And there are going to be things that we don't like about it. I mean, that's why it's, air quote here, like, that's why it's work. That's why they pay you to do it. It is not 100% comfortable, fun, and super happiness all the time. And if it was, it would probably not be work. They would probably call that fun. That's what they call days off and vacations. And typically, maybe bosses wouldn't want to be paying you to have fun on vacation someplace else. So if we can start thinking about the phrase, it just is, because we have to, first of all, own our emotions. So only, I'm in control of my emotions. You can't control my emotions. Your boss can't control your emotions. So we need to just kind of learn how to start to accept some things. And that in part means adjusting our expectations. And I'll give you a very personal example of adjusting expectations in the workplace for me. During the time when I was very much ready to leave the healthcare world, I was burned out and frustrated and disappointed with the career, disappointed with the healthcare system, really stressed out, overwhelmed, all of the things. And it affected my emotional well-being. It affected my health span, for sure, my lifespan. It's definitely my happiness. Of the many tools that I use, one was, going back to this, it just is. This is the healthcare system. And the healthcare system in the US is, to say the least, hopefully this isn't shocking news to anybody, but it is inefficient. It's screwed up. There are definitely subpar outcomes. We have the capacity to do so much better, to provide people better healthcare than we do, but we don't. When I left the hospital I was in many years ago to start my own rehab and performance practice, I had this motto in my mind that I was going to change the model of health and fitness. I wanted to change the model. And in my naive mind, if not very ambitious mind, I wanted to change this model, recognizing that there's so much better that we can do to provide health for people, healthcare services and fitness services for people, that I was going to change the model. And it didn't take me all that long to realize that the model, really being the healthcare system in the US, I wasn't about to change. It was far beyond my capacity to change. And I can have all the ambition in the world. I could have all the frustration in the world. I could be as burned out as anybody can be on this healthcare system, but I could not change it. And so I had this other option, which is accept it because it just is. And so there's a certain sense of stoicism. And if you're not familiar with stoicism, I would definitely encourage you to do a little research. In fact, I'll probably do a few episodes on this because it's something that I really enjoy reading about. And I think in situations with like burnout, it can come in handy. So part of the Stoic philosophy is one practice that they call amor fati, and it is love of fate. And what this really means is, this is going to sound weird, but actually embracing the challenge, embracing the limitations of your work. So instead of fighting and being resistant to the way the work system is set up for you and your career and your specific job, whatever you do multiple days a week, you could, and I would recommend you should, try to embrace the challenges and really look at each challenge, for as cliche as it sounds, look at it as an opportunity. How can you make the best out of this crappy situation? And I mean, probably in today's terms, I would actually use the word gamify, which seems to be, trying to make a game out of everything really kind of engages people a little bit more. So if you can learn through gamifying things, and we have apps on our phone that can teach you a different language by making a little game out of it. And there's bells and whistles and whatnot. And by making it a game, it's easier to digest something that's challenging. And for me, again, to keep going back to the healthcare setting, the challenge of seeing many people, many clients on a limited time schedule, that I can be frustrated by it, and I can still be frustrated by it. But now I gamify it because, one, it just is. The system is just what it is. The workplace is what it is. So how do I make the best out of this limitation? What I see as a limitation, and certainly a challenge. So now my challenge with every single patient I see is, what is the most powerful thing I can do for this person in the shortest amount of time possible? So no frills, no wasted treatment approach, no wasted exercise, no wasted conversation, no wasted sentence. Like everything that I can do with a person in a limited amount of time is like the most edited, paper you've ever written in your life. It's the most concise expression of work, the most concise expression of your skill set, of my skill set with my clients, that they get the most impact in the shortest amount of time possible, because by design of the workplace that I'm in, time is of the essence. So we see a ton of people. There's time pressures, there's billing pressures, there's patient after patient, and for you it may be project after project, it may be meeting after meeting, but whatever that is, like, how do I get the most return on the investment of my time? Because the workplace situation is challenging. The workplace situation has limitations. The environment has limitations. And so I'm going to figure out a way to use these limitations to improve myself by making sure I express things the best way possible in the most concise way possible. And that's what matches my particular work environment. So to apply this for yourself, if you have a difficult colleague or a last minute deadline or you have limited resources, instead of being focused and sort of spiraling into being discouraged and overwhelmed, take pause and think, how can you take this limitation and really make something awesome of it. If you don't have an abundance of something, it makes you be kind of frugal, and it makes you be really thoughtful, because you can't be kind of willy-nilly with everything you're doing, because things are finite, and resources can be finite, and whether that's time, mental energy, attention, literal, physical resources. When you have these limitations, you have an opportunity to think, how am I going to make the best out of this? Like, how am I going to make this so awesome that people are going to wonder, how is that possible? How did you achieve this project? You must have 10 people on your team. Well, no, maybe it's just you. Or maybe it's just you and one or two other people. But you have an amazing outcome. You've made lemonades out of lemons, if you will. But it is love the fate. It is embracing the challenge. It is accepting the challenge. Because if the challenge, again, if it is, it just is, the situation is what it is, you can hate it, you can love it, it doesn't matter. So with the demands of my workplace, the way that our schedules are set up, I could love the way the schedules are set up, or I could hate the way the schedules are set up. And either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It just is. That is the situation. So therefore, I have two different paths I could take. One is I could just be completely frustrated all the time, burn myself out, saying this isn't ideal, this isn't perfect, this isn't the way I want it, and lead myself to burnout. Or I can take the other path, which is, that's the situation. That's what it is. Now, what am I going to do? How am I going to embrace this, embrace the challenge? And if you listen to my podcast, you already know, like, I like challenges. I'm still a competitive athlete despite age and limited time. So I like a challenge. And so how can I embrace this and get the most out of it? And really the purpose of this is to reduce our feelings of frustration, to reduce our anxiety, and to create, really, again, it's a sense of ownership over your response. So you're owning the response to a situation. You're not giving it up and just throwing your hands up, but you're going to say, hey, this is what it is. I'm going to own it. What's the best way I can deal with this? And I promise you that with practice, you will build an emotional fortitude that if you don't already do this, that you probably didn't know you had. You will be far more empowered to have a better attitude towards situations that you really can't control. It just is. It is embrace. It is love the fate. So again, that's a stoic approach to things. The second stoic approach to things is focusing on the control. So focus on this, like what they call a circle of control. And this circle of control is going to ring true to kind of some of the things I was just saying, but it is really focusing on only what you can control, which is how you act, it is how you respond, and it is your mindset. I'm going to say this again, your mindset. So when people lose control, when people lose emotional control, and they throw a fit, to me, that is actually, it's a pretty robust sign of weakness. It's a sign of having a mindset that should be fortified to tolerate things and to manage things a little bit better. So we know that I'm in control of my actions. You're in control of your actions, our responses, our mindset. And that leaves things that are out of our control. So there are things like workplace politics. There are other people's behavior. There's economic environment. There is the system of whatever workplace you happen to be in. Again, for me, it's healthcare. So, the system of healthcare that is completely out of my control, and therefore probably shouldn't waste a whole lot of mental energy about it. I don't want to stress from it because I can't control it. So whether I stress about it or I don't stress about it, it doesn't matter. The situation is just what it is. So how do you apply this approach to the workplace? I would encourage you to start your day by, if you're, and this is specific, if you're really feeling like you're kind of on the cusp here of being really burned out, I would encourage you to start your day by thinking exactly what things you can control and exactly what things you cannot control. And again, I'm a sucker for making a list here. So if you make a list of the things in your work environment that you can control, which is, your attitude, your effort. I mean, obviously you can work really hard or you can be kind of lazy, and we've all been on both sides of that spectrum. We can control the way that we respond to challenges. We can control the way we respond to our colleagues. So that's within your control. So you can actually do something with that. You have ownership of that, and it's up to you. Then you can also make that other list of things that you can't control, and making sure that when there are challenges that come up and you feel like you've been, maybe the wind knocked out of you a little bit, take pause and say, wait a minute, can I actually control what's going on here, or can I not? And if you cannot, let it go. It just is. You have to find a way to kind of Write that on a piece of paper, crumple it up, throw it away, throw it in the trash, or go start a fire pit out in your backyard with all the list of things that you cannot control and just let them go. And as I said at the kind of precursor to this is hard. This takes, to master this sort of mental, fortitude and these mental and emotional skills far exceeds what I can express here in this podcast, as opposed to just giving you some simple, deep breathing exercises, which work great. So definitely do those. But these are really about changing your perspective on the world around us and realizing that if you were to decide to stress and become preoccupied by the millions of problems that we have on this planet that are all by definition problems and can be stressful and overwhelming, whether it's politics or healthcare or human rights or environment and a billion other things that are challenges for everything that's going on this planet. You'd never sleep. You could be wound up tight as a drum, stressed out all the time on things that you have literally no control over. And that's no way to live. And that's a great way to lead to burnout in work and in life overall. So for your own mental and emotional well-being, working on your perspective, setting boundaries, talking to the people that may be able to influence and help you with your boundaries can set you up for success and help you hopefully not be one of those people that are you have one foot out the door from your job or your career because you're just absolutely burned out, preoccupied, stressed out all the time. There are many, many actions you can take for managing your stress, managing your overall stress, and obviously your work related stress. And there are far too many to cover today, but they would include, just for the sake of at least listing them, learning meditation and there's so many just great apps out there. And I think I've mentioned this on previous episodes, the Calm app, Calm, CALM. The Calm app has some great guided breathing exercises and meditation and just even music and things that kind of are great for calming your nervous system down. That could help. Learning to journal or journal consistently, writing down your stressors, talking to a mental health professional, talking to a counselor. If you work in any moderate sized company, you probably have an HR department. You may have access to this stuff already in your benefits package. Exercising decreases stress. Exercises fixes pretty much almost everything that ails you. So when in doubt, exercise because it'll probably help fix your problem. Quality sleep, time management strategies, really having healthy, great nutrition. All of these things will also, they've been directly, absolutely, unequivocally tied to decreasing your stress overall. And so while workplace stress and burnout is very real and those situations are very specific to the workplace, your tolerance, your overall, you know, stamina tolerance for workplace stress may be low, in part because of the workplace specific issues, but also maybe just because your life in general is chaotic and stressful. And so learning some of these very real stress management techniques in a general sense, again, not specific to talking to your boss about something, but just generally learning how to manage your stress, you may actually have a whole heck of a lot more bandwidth and emotional fortitude and stamina to deal with some of the stressors that are in your workplace. Breathing exercises, learning some deep breathing. These things are great to use in the workplace, in the heat of the moment, when you're a little bit stressed, when things are kind of feeling overwhelmed. But they're great to do when you're stuck in traffic. They're great when you've got to be 10 places at once and you feel like you're kind of just stressed out. Doing a breathing exercise is great. Doing a deep breathing exercise will calm your nervous system down and you'll have benefits for home and work. So the one thing you can do today to extend your health span, this has to be, of course, about what you can do to prevent burnout. And the one thing I would encourage you to practice is working on perspective of work. If, especially after talking to a manager on trying to trying to create your ideal work situation, your work boundaries, if you find that you've laid it out on the table and those work boundaries are unacceptable for your manager, that those boundaries are unacceptable for your boss, then you know. Then you know that your boundaries are not compatible, your ideal boundaries are not compatible with the workplace. And then you have an option at that point. You can choose to leave, or you can choose to accept some of them or all of them and say, It just is. And make the best of it. Make it a challenge. And as always, please practice stress management skills. I really appreciate you listening to this episode. It is a challenging one for me to talk about because I feel like it's, I'll say it's a little touchy feely, or it's hard to kind of give you a very specific action item because it's really about really reflecting deeply. And that is very personal. And I think that I work with this, this deep reflection and perspective with my clients that this takes many conversations and learning how to manage certain situations and stressful situations. But if nothing else, I think practicing setting boundaries, as we discussed, and trying to accept the things that you cannot change is a great start on quieting your nervous system. So please give those a try. If you have any other questions about emotional well-being or any of the pillars of healthspan, which is exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional well-being, and preventative care, please send me a message. You can message me through this. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can drop a message below and I will respond. You can also check out my contact information on the podcast platform and on the description on YouTube as well. So please feel free to reach out. I love hearing from listeners, so I know that I'm not just talking to myself all the time. So that's really cool. And if you have any tips yourself that you would like to share, let me know and I'll share those with everybody else. So until next time, be well and set boundaries.